Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I hope that you are having a wonderful day. If you're new here, my name is Neve and it would indeed mean the world to me if you would stick around. I'm currently filming today's video at 1 o'clock in the morning, so I have brought with me a cup of tea. I'm surprised I haven't had a cup of tea in more of my videos, to be honest, considering I spend about 90% of my time drinking from a cup of tea. But there's a first time for everything on this channel, so the tea is with us today in a very lovely mug. It's my mum's but I have stolen. She didn't like it as much as she thought she would, so I was like, that cool mug is mine. It is mine now, I've taken it on. Today's video is going to be my June reading wrap up. If you watched my Pride Month TBR earlier on in the month, you will have realised that my main goal this month was to read only queer novels, which I have done, but there is a book in today's video that is not a queer novel, and I will explain why when I get to it. I will do it first so you won't have to wait long, but basically last month I started reading Frankenstein and I got a good bit of the way through it, but I hadn't quite finished it by the time I filmed my May wrap up, and I said in that video that I would let you guys know what I thought this month. So Frankenstein is in today's video, but for the most part I didn't read it in June, so I have not broken my only queer books this month rule, I promise. So we're just going to dive right into today's books and what I thought of them. I hope you enjoy. Okay, so the first book that I'm going to be talking about is, as I said, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I gave this book a 4 out of 5. I enjoyed it so much more than I was expecting that I would, and I found it much easier to read than I thought I might. I was a little bit worried that I'd find this quite difficult to get through just purely because of language, and there certainly were moments where I had to reread sentences or paragraphs like a couple of times over in a way I maybe wouldn't have to do with a contemporary novel, but I found it much less of a difficulty than I thought I would. I managed to get through it with fairly minimal issue, which I was very happy about because I did really want to read this book and I was really worried about that being what disappointed me as opposed to just like my actual opinion of the novel. So that's good. I enjoyed this book. I enjoyed the way, obviously the majority of this story is about Victor Frankenstein, him creating the creature, his spiral into insanity, and the wreckage of his life because of those actions. But I also enjoyed the way they sort of like wove into this other storyline with the guy on the boat, and I really enjoyed the bits that were from the creature's perspective. I, previous to reading this, had watched the National Theatre production of it that was, the text was written by Nick Dear, that he wrote the play adaptation that the National Theatre did, and I loved it and I thought it was so interesting, and I didn't realise, because it was the sort of first adaptation or piece inspired by Frankenstein that I'd ever watched in its entirety, that it actually had a very rare take of an adaptation in comparison to most others, because it was very much an exploration of the creature and his life and his perspective, and I didn't realise that that wasn't the case in most other things, and I also didn't realise that in doing that it strayed so much closer to the novel than adaptations that people were used to. So I think I went into this book from a theatrical point, and I was actually slightly disappointed that there was not as much from the creature's perspective as I thought there was, because my first exposure had been this play that is quite a lot from the creature's perspective. So that was quite interesting, where Frankenstein is quite clearly the protagonist of the novel. I feel the creature is the protagonist of the play, so I was like, well, when does his chapter come in? And there was less of them than I was expecting, but I don't think that actually held me back from enjoying this book. I just was surprised. I thought Frankenstein as a character was so fascinating. I thought his descent into just pure madness to a degree of like illness was so interesting, because you really got to watch it happen step by step until by the end you were kind of just like something put him out of his misery. Like, has he brought this upon himself? Yes. Do I think somebody should just off him and just let him stop thinking for a minute? Yeah. I highly recommend you read this book. I wasn't sure that I would recommend it, but I am recommending it if you haven't read it. Most people I feel have read this book, I think, from what I've seen online anyway, but if you haven't, I definitely do actually think that you should give it a go, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Okay, so now that Frankenstein is out of the way, we can move on to the queer books I read this month. For the most part, you'll probably know what these books are because you might have watched my TBR, and I did get through a couple of the books on the TBR. Not all. But it's okay. I'm not disappointed in myself, so you're not allowed to be disappointed in me either. First up, we have The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. This was the one book this month that I was like, you are going to read it, whether you like it or not. And I did read it, and I think I did like it. I haven't given this a rating yet, or like my little summary reviews that I do on Instagram, because I'm finding it difficult to compile like a particular opinion, because it wasn't what I expected, but I don't know what I did expect, and I don't think it's different from what I thought it would be. Disappointed. I really don't know what I'm trying to say. I think I was expecting this book to blow me away, and it didn't. But I'm also not necessarily disappointed. It just wasn't what I expected it to be. I liked Celie's character. I liked that it felt like you were sort of talking to like a friend, almost. Like it felt like someone was sending you like letters, and it was deeply personal. It really did just feel like you were growing into a life with this woman, only the life that this woman is living and the hardships that she's facing that sort of appear to be and are described as like normal problems for Celie, it's not at all anything like a life I could even imagine living. One, because I am white, and therefore my experience with the world will always be drastically different, and has always been drastically different to the life of people who are not white, and in this instance people who are black. But also, obviously, like, this is set a good while ago, which plays a part in it. It's in America, which plays a part in it. So it was not necessarily a woman whose struggles I personally could relate to, but I had so much empathy for like most of the characters in this book, and I thought it was such an intelligent exploration of humanity, because there were a lot of characters that I feel the author had so much more compassion for than I would have expected them to have, and that I also feel like I would not have had that level of compassion for those characters, both if I was the author and if they were real people that I were encountering in the real world. So I found that really interesting, that there were characters that by the end of the story I was like, oh, I kind of like them now, or like I've been dissuaded from my hatred in ways I didn't expect to be. This is another one of those books where I definitely think that everyone should read it, and I definitely do feel like I took something really important away from it, but I am finding it quite difficult to put into words the impact it did have and the opinion that I have of it. The next book that I'm going to be discussing, and the last book that I finished this month, because it was not a plentiful month of reading for me this month, is Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Byron. I said I'd learn how to pronounce it, and I did check, and I have forgotten. I'm very sorry. But Cinderella is Dead is basically set in a world where the story of Cinderella is basically used to enforce this totalitarian regime that the people in the city that it's set in are forced to live under, where basically women have no value at all, and every year young women go to this ball that they're invited to by the king, who is running Lille like a dictatorship, and they have to be chosen by men to be married to them, and if they aren't chosen in 3 years, like I think they only get 3 chances, they get surrendered as forfeit and executed. And it's awful, and it's not nice. And the protagonist, Sophia, doesn't want to abide by these rules. 1, because she thinks they're horrific, but 2, because she's gay and she doesn't want to marry a man at all. And she ends up making a split second decision at her first ball that puts her right in the middle of what seems to be a uprising, and she has to navigate that. And I love this book, actually. I was drawn in, for starters, by the cover, because isn't this just the most gorgeous book cover you've ever seen in your life? I genuinely don't think I've seen a prettier book than this one. But I wasn't expecting to love it the way I did, because I generally don't like fantasy. I find it quite difficult to get into, especially standalones, because I feel like you spend so much time building the world for the very little time you end up actually being in it. And I think sometimes that detracts from what I enjoy in books, which is usually characters. I'm a fan of character-driven books. But I really enjoyed this one. I think my only like proper criticism, or not even criticism, but thing that I personally was not a massive fan of, was I did feel like the book went in too quickly. Not as in like I read it too quickly, but I just felt like the actual pacing only spanned like a couple of days, which I wasn't expecting. But I don't know if that's just because I don't read a lot of fantasy, so I'm not sure of how these things often go. Like, it might be very common for standalone fantasy novels to only span over a couple of days, and I'm just not familiar with the genre, so I'm hesitant to make too much of like a criticism about it, in case it's just me who is out of my depth in a sense, if you get what I mean. But I love this. I really like the main character. I liked a lot of the relationships she built. I enjoyed the pacing in the sense that I read this book quite quickly. I never felt like it was dragging on. I never felt like things were being over-explained or time was being wasted, even if I did sometimes think, wow, that was quick. They've done a lot of things in not a lot of time. But yeah, it was wonderful. In hindsight, actually, the book doesn't only span over a couple of days, it spans over like longer than that. But it felt like there's only like I don't know how to explain it without giving a lot of stuff away, but it felt like there was only like 3 days or whatever of stuff that was actually described, and the other time that passed was just kind of like 3 weeks later. Like, do you get what I mean? Which again is probably from my lack of familiarity with how fantasy novels are usually structured, instead of it being structured poorly. But anyway, I love this book. I love the main character. I liked the concept. I thought the concept was executed really cleverly. I thought the villain was an interesting villain, especially for a character whose sole purpose is just to be the bad guy and either win or lose. Like, he did not exist to fulfill like a complex arc. But I thought he was so interesting, and I thought what made him powerful and what made him evil, or made him able to commit evil, was so fascinating. I definitely recommend this book. And I liked the romance too. The romance was definitely not necessarily the focal point of the novel, but it was like a nice addition that was written quite well. It was pretty tame. It was definitely like a side plot, although it was involving the main character. But I liked it. I liked the two characters. I liked their relationship, like, separate to the romance of it. And I thought it was really interesting and really well executed. I thought it was really interesting, and I thought it was really well executed. And I absolutely do recommend that you read this, especially if you're a fan of fantasy novels already. The last book that I'm going to talk about today, but I'm not going to give a full review, I will do the full review of this book in my July wrap up because I'm not finished it like Frankenstein last month, is The Last Night at the Telegraph Club. This was not on my TBR because when I filmed my TBR I did not own this book. But then I had to buy it. I couldn't hold myself back from buying it anymore, and as soon as it arrived I looked at it and I went, I have to read this. I have to do it. I can't put it off. Look how gorgeous the cover is. The summary was just so like enticing to me, and I was like, I have to do it. I can't make myself wait to July. And my excuse for letting myself do this is it is a queer novel, and therefore it is sticking to my only queer novels in Pride Month rule, so I let myself have it. I'm not really sorry because so far I'm having a lot of fun. I'm about halfway through. I really haven't been reading massive amounts this month. I've found it really difficult to concentrate, and I've not necessarily been busy, but I've been that kind of like, it's one of those months where I've wasted a lot of time pretty much doing nothing but feeling like I've done a lot of things and not known where the time's gone, so I've not spent a lot of time reading. But yeah, I will review this in my July wrap up. So far I'm thinking it'll be a positive review, but if you are intrigued to know what I think, come back at the end of this month, start of next month for my July wrap up and you can get a proper review of it. So there we go, that is all of the books that I read this month and what I thought of them. It seems like a bit of a lackluster roundup. I am very sorry for that. Hopefully I will read more this month. It's sort of like officially summer. There are no like last minute school obligations. I have officially graduated high school, and I currently do not have massive amounts of plans for the summer, so fingers crossed. I would like to spend a lot of July and August reading, but I'm not going to promise anything because if I promise it, it'll end up not happening and I'll just be annoyed at myself. So let's all just cross our fingers and we'll wait and see. But yeah, I hope that you enjoyed today's video. I hope that my below average reviews convinced you to pick one of these books up. If you have any recommendations for me for books that you read this month, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Let me know what you're planning on reading in July. If you read a lot of queer books over Pride Month, what was your favourite? I'm always looking for more queer book recommendations because I do primarily read queer novels whether it's Pride Month or not Pride Month, so I would be so excited to hear what some of your favourites are. I hope that you have a lovely evening, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye!